A gospel legend publicly said Elvis had no right to sing sacred music. What happened 6 months later made her fall to her knees. It's October 1966. A radio studio in Chicago. The red recording light is on. The microphone is live. And Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the woman who literally invented rock and roll guitar before Elvis Presley was even born, is about to say something that will ignite a controversy she can't take back. The interviewer asks her opinion about Elvis's recent gospel recordings. There's a pause, not a comfortable pause. The kind of pause where everyone listening knows something sharp is about to cut through the air. That boy, she says slowly, has a voice for selling records, not for reaching heaven. The interviewer laughs nervously. Sister Rosetta doesn't. Gospel isn't something you perform, she continues. It's something you live, and I don't care how many screaming girls think he's the king of something. When it comes to gospel music, Elvis Presley is playing dress-up in his mama's Sunday clothes. The interview is broadcast across 32 radio stations. Within 48 hours, it's been quoted in newspapers from Memphis to Los Angeles. Music journalists are calling it the most brutal takedown of Elvis they've ever heard. And here's the thing that makes it devastating. Sister Rosetta Tharpe isn't wrong about much when it comes to music. But she's about to be proven wrong about this. And the moment it happens will break something inside her that she didn't even know could break. If you're here because you love the untold stories behind music history, the moments that happen between the headlines, go ahead and subscribe right now. Because what you're about to hear didn't make it into any official biography, but it changed 2 lives forever. To understand why Sister Rosetta's words carried the weight they did, you need to understand who she was. And I don't mean her resume. I mean who she actually was to the fabric of American music. Sister Rosetta Tharpe was born in 1915 in Cotton Plant, Arkansas. By the time she was 4 years old, she was playing guitar in Pentecostal churches across the South. Not strumming, playing. Real chord progressions, complex fingerpicking patterns, the kind of technique that made grown musicians stop and stare. By the 1930s, she was performing in New York City, playing gospel music with a distorted electric guitar tone that wouldn't show up in rock and roll for another 15 years. She recorded Strange Things Happening Every Day in 1944, a song that music historians now recognize as one of the first rock and roll recordings ever made. This was before Chuck Berry, before Little Richard, before Elvis was even 10 years old. Johnny Cash once said Sister Rosetta Tharpe's guitar playing changed his life. Jerry Lee Lewis said she taught him what the spirit looked like when it moved through music. Little Richard called her the original soul sister. She had performed for kings and presidents. She had filled concert halls across Europe. She had influenced virtually every major rock and roll and gospel artist of the 1950s and 60s. When Sister Rosetta Tharpe spoke about sacred music, the entire industry listened. So when she said Elvis Presley had no business singing gospel, it wasn't gossip, it was a verdict. But what nobody knew, what wouldn't come out until decades later, was why she said it. Because the criticism wasn't really about Elvis at all. 3 weeks after the interview aired, Sister Rosetta was performing at a gospel festival in Detroit. Between sets, a young journalist from a black music magazine approached her backstage. He asked if she wanted to clarify her comments about Elvis, maybe soften them a little given the backlash she'd been receiving. Her response wasn't what he expected. "You want to know what I really think?" she said. Her voice was quiet now, stripped of the confidence she'd had on the radio. "I think that boy has more God-given talent in his voice than most people get in their entire bodies. And I think he's going to take our music, the music my mother sang in fields she didn't own, the music that kept our people alive when everything else was trying to kill us, and he's going to make millions while the people who created it die broke." The journalist didn't print that quote. Years later, he'd say he didn't print it because he realized Sister Rosetta wasn't angry at Elvis. She was angry at a system that had ignored her brilliance for decades while making Elvis Presley the most famous man on earth. And she wasn't wrong to be angry. She had invented sounds that others became millionaires copying. She had broken barriers that others walked through without acknowledgement. She had given everything to music that took everything from her and gave back just enough to keep her performing in churches and small venues while younger, whiter artists filled stadiums. But here's what makes this story more than just another tale of justified anger and cultural appropriation. Here's the moment that changes everything. Because 3 months after that interview, Sister Rosetta Tharpe received a phone call that made her hands shake. It was late November 1966. Sister Rosetta was staying at a small hotel in Philadelphia, preparing for a performance the next day. The phone in her room rang just after 10 p.m. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick it up. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. A man who identified himself as Jerry Sheff, a session bass player who'd recently worked with Elvis in Nashville. He was calling, he said, because Elvis had asked him to. "Mr. Presley wanted me to invite you to something," Jerry said carefully. "He's recording at RCA Studio B next week, December 3rd. He's working on some gospel material and he'd like you to be there, not to perform, just to listen if you're willing." Sister Rosetta's first instinct was to say no. The invitation felt like a setup, a publicity stunt, something Colonel Parker cooked up to make Elvis look gracious and her look bitter if she refused. But Jerry said something else before she could answer. "He also asked me to tell you that he's not trying to prove anything. He said, and these are his exact words, 'I just want Sister Rosetta to hear what gospel music means to me. Even if she still thinks I'm wrong after, at least she'll know I'm not playing.'" That last line, that's what changed her mind. Because you can't fake that kind of vulnerability. You can't manufacture that kind of specific, personal invitation. Either Elvis Presley genuinely cared what Sister Rosetta Tharpe thought about his gospel music, or he was a better actor than anyone had ever given him credit for. She agreed to come. She didn't tell anyone. Not her manager, not her friends, not the journalists who'd been hounding her for follow-up comments. She just booked a flight to Nashville and showed up at RCA Studio B on December 3rd, 1966, with no idea what she was about to witness. What she found when she walked through that studio door wasn't what she expected. Studio B was quiet when she arrived. Not empty, quiet. There were maybe 8 people in the room, a small group of musicians, an engineer, a producer named Felton Jarvis, and Elvis sitting alone at a piano in the corner, his head bowed like he was praying. Nobody made a big deal about her arrival. Jerry Sheff nodded hello. Felton shook her hand and offered her a chair in the control room, positioned where she could see everything but wouldn't be in the way. Elvis looked up, met her eyes for just a second, and nodded once. No smile, no performance, just acknowledgement. Then he turned back to the piano and started playing. The song was "Where No One Stands Alone," an old gospel hymn written by Mosi Lister in 1955. Simple melody, simple lyrics, the kind of song that didn't need production or arrangement to carry weight. It just needed someone who understood what it meant. And here's the thing Sister Rosetta noticed immediately, the thing that made her sit up straighter in her chair. Elvis wasn't performing. He wasn't doing the thing he did on television, the charisma, the physical presence, the calculated magnetism that made teenage girls lose their minds. He was singing like he was alone, like the microphone wasn't there. Like the musicians, the engineer, the legend sitting in the control room judging him, like none of them existed. His voice was different than she'd heard on the radio, softer, more vulnerable. There were moments where it cracked, where the emotion pushed through the technique and made the sound raw. Classical training teaches you to smooth those cracks out. Elvis let them stay. The lyrics are simple. "When I'm alone, I face the unknown without a friend to hold my hand." But the way he sang them, the way his voice broke on the word alone, it didn't sound like a performance of loneliness. It sounded like a confession. Sister Rosetta had been in the music industry for 40 years. She'd heard thousands of singers. She knew the difference between someone singing about faith and someone singing from faith. And what she was hearing from Elvis Presley was not a white boy playing dress-up in gospel clothes. It was someone who understood exactly what these songs were for, what they meant, where they came from. But it was what happened next that destroyed her completely. After the first take, Elvis stopped. He didn't say it was good or bad. He just sat at the piano for a moment, his hands still on the keys, breathing like he'd been running. Felton Jarvis came over the talkback from the control room. "That was beautiful, Elvis. You want to do another?" Elvis shook his head. "Not yet." He looked up at the glass window separating the studio from the control room. He couldn't see Sister Rosetta clearly through the reflection and the dim lighting, but he knew she was there. "I want to tell you all something," he said. His voice was quiet but clear. "Most people don't know this. Most people don't need to know it. But Sister Rosetta's in there, and I want her to understand why I'm doing this." The studio went completely silent. My mama, Elvis continued, used to take me to church when I was so small I couldn't see over the pew in front of me. We didn't have money for anything. Not for food half the time, not for clothes, not for anything that made life easier. But Mama never missed church. And the music we heard there, the gospel music, that was the only thing that made her feel like we weren't just poor people who didn't matter. It made her feel held. His voice caught on that last word. He stopped, collected himself, continued. Gospel music didn't teach me how to sing. It taught me why to sing. Every song I've ever recorded, every performance I've ever done, it all goes back to those churches in Tupelo where people who had nothing sang like they had everything. I'm not trying to take that from anybody. I'm trying to honor it. Even if I'm not good enough. Even if people think I don't have the right. I have to try because that music is the only thing that ever made me feel like I wasn't alone. Sister Rosetta felt something crack inside her chest. Not anger, not defensiveness. Something deeper and more painful than both. Recognition. Because what Elvis had just described, that specific feeling of being held by music when everything else in the world made you feel invisible, that was the exact same reason she sang gospel. That was the exact same sanctuary she'd found in churches across Arkansas when she was a little girl who didn't fit anywhere else. The circumstances were different, the history was different, the cultural context was different. But the human need for music to make you feel less alone, that was identical. She had assumed Elvis Presley sang gospel because it was marketable, because his management told him it would expand his audience, because it was another costume he could put on and take off. She had never considered that he sang it for the same reason she did. Because he had to. Elvis recorded 3 more takes of Where No One Stands Alone that night. Each one was different. Each one revealed something new. By the final take, Sister Rosetta had tears running down her face, and she didn't bother wiping them away. When the session ended, Felton asked if she wanted to come out and meet Elvis properly. She almost said no. She didn't trust herself to speak without her voice breaking. But she stood up, walked into the studio, and approached the man she'd publicly humiliated 3 months earlier. Elvis stood when he saw her coming. His hands were in his pockets, he looked nervous. Before he could say anything, Sister Rosetta spoke. And what she said, according to Jerry Sheff, who was standing close enough to hear, was this. I was wrong about you. 4 words, no qualification, no explanation, no attempt to soften it or contextualize it or protect her pride. Elvis started to respond. She held up her hand. Let me finish, she said. I was wrong because I assumed I knew your heart. I assumed you were doing this for fame or money or because someone told you it would be good for your image. And I'm standing here telling you in front of all these people that I was wrong. You understand this music. You feel it the way it's supposed to be felt. And I'm sorry I said you didn't. The room was silent. Elvis's eyes were red. He nodded, tried to speak, couldn't. Finally, he managed 2 words. Thank you. What happened next, nobody in that studio expected. Sister Rosetta asked if she could record something with him. They didn't plan it. They didn't arrange it. They didn't even discuss what song they'd do. Sister Rosetta just asked if there was another microphone, and Felton scrambled to set one up. She and Elvis stood at the piano. He asked what she wanted to sing. She suggested, Precious Lord, Take My Hand, the Thomas Dorsey hymn that had carried her through every difficult moment of her life. They didn't rehearse. Elvis just started playing, and Sister Rosetta started singing, and within 4 bars, Elvis joined her in harmony. The recording is rough. It was never meant to be released. Nobody was prepared for it. The levels aren't perfect. You can hear chairs scraping in the background. You can hear someone in the control room saying, "Oh my God," under their breath. But the performance is devastating. 2 voices from 2 completely different worlds singing the same prayer. Sister Rosetta's voice, deep and rich and carrying the weight of 40 years of performance. Elvis's voice, higher and softer but matching her intensity perfectly. They weren't performing for an audience. They were singing to each other, for each other, maybe even about each other. By the second verse, everyone in the studio was crying. The musicians, the engineers. Jerry Sheff later said it was the most powerful musical moment he ever witnessed in his entire career. When the song ended, Sister Rosetta and Elvis didn't speak. They just stood there for a moment, both of them understanding that something had shifted, not just between them, inside them. Sister Rosetta had spent 3 months carrying anger and resentment, and the justified pain of being overlooked by an industry that celebrated her imitators. And in one recording session, one song, one honest moment, she felt that weight lift. Not because Elvis proved her wrong, because he showed her they were the same. Sister Rosetta Tharpe never publicly retracted her original comments about Elvis. She didn't need to. The gospel music community knew. Word traveled fast in those circles. Within weeks, musicians who'd been at Studio B that night had told other musicians, who told others, who told others. The story wasn't shared to embarrass her. It was shared because what happened between Sister Rosetta and Elvis represented something bigger than one argument about one artist. It represented the possibility of reconciliation, of two people from different sides of a cultural divide finding common ground in the one place that transcended everything else. The music itself. Sister Rosetta and Elvis stayed in contact after that night. Not constantly, not publicly, but they wrote letters. They sent each other recordings. When Sister Rosetta was performing in Memphis, Elvis came to hear her. When Elvis was recording gospel material, he'd sometimes call her for advice on arrangements. In 1970, Sister Rosetta gave an interview to a small gospel music publication. The interviewer asked if she still believed what she'd said about Elvis in 1966. Her answer was careful, honest. "I believed it when I said it," she told them. "I believed it because I was hurting, and hurt people sometimes say true things in untrue ways. Was Elvis Presley taking advantage of black music? Yes. That's not an opinion, that's history. Did the industry celebrate him while ignoring the people who created the sounds he was copying? Yes. That's also not an opinion. But did Elvis Presley personally have a genuine, deep, authentic love for gospel music? Did he understand it the way I understand it? Did he sing it from the same place of need and faith and brokenness that I sing it from?" She paused. Yes, he did, and both things can be true at the same time. Sister Rosetta Tharpe passed away in 1973. She died relatively unknown outside of gospel music circles, despite having influenced virtually every major artist of the rock and roll era. It would take decades before she'd be recognized properly, before she'd be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, before music historians would finally acknowledge that she invented the sound everyone else became famous playing. Elvis died 4 years later in 1977. Among his personal belongings, his family found dozens of gospel recordings. Some were commercial releases. Some were private recordings, never meant for public consumption. And one of them was that rough, unplanned recording of Precious Lord, Take My Hand with Sister Rosetta Tharpe. He'd kept it all those years, a reminder of the night someone saw past his image and recognized his heart. Here's what this story is actually about. It's not about Elvis being vindicated. It's not about Sister Rosetta being wrong. It's about something harder and more important than either of those things. It's about the assumptions we make when we're hurting. Sister Rosetta Tharpe had every right to be angry. She had every reason to question Elvis's authenticity. The cultural theft she was responding to was real. The pain she carried was legitimate, and the criticism she leveled came from a place of genuine love for music that had been exploited for generations. But she assumed she knew Elvis's heart without ever hearing it. She judged his interior life based on his public image. She decided what he felt before she listened to how he felt it. And when she finally listened, really listened, everything changed. Not because she was wrong about the industry. She wasn't. But because she discovered that the man inside the image was carrying the same weight she was. That his need for gospel music came from the same place hers did. That they were, in the most fundamental way, singing the same song for the same reasons. Elvis didn't need Sister Rosetta's approval to validate his faith, but her recognition meant something to him anyway. Because being truly seen by someone who understands the thing you love most, there's no replacement for that. There's no substitute. And Sister Rosetta didn't need Elvis to prove anything to her. But experiencing his sincerity firsthand gave her something she'd been missing. Not vindication. Connection. The reminder that music, real music, the kind that comes from brokenness and need and faith, that music doesn't belong to one person or one culture or one history. It belongs to everyone who needs it, and some of us need it to survive. I think about that recording session a lot. 2 legends, 2 different worlds, 1 piano, 1 song, and the courage it took for both of them to show up. It took courage for Elvis to invite someone who'd publicly humiliated him into the most sacred part of his creative life, to sing honestly in front of her, to risk her walking out and telling the world he was exactly the fake she thought he was. And it took even more courage for Sister Rosetta to walk into that studio, to let go of her assumptions, to admit she'd been wrong about something, to recognize truth even when it came from a source she'd already decided couldn't contain it. That's the kind of courage most of us don't have, the kind that requires putting down our defenses even when we've been hurt, even when we have good reasons to stay protected, even when being wrong means acknowledging that we missed something important. But that's also the kind of courage that changes everything. One song, 3 minutes, 2 voices, and a wound that started healing the moment both of them stopped performing and started being honest. So here's what I want to know. Has someone ever completely changed your mind about them? Not through an argument, not through an explanation, but through one moment, one action, one genuine expression of who they actually were underneath everything you assumed. Tell me about it in the comments, not because I need engagement, because those stories matter. Because every time someone has the courage to be seen and someone else has the courage to actually look, something shifts, something heals, something that seemed impossible becomes the most natural thing in the world. And if this story moved you, share it. Not for the algorithm. Share it because somewhere out there, someone is carrying the same assumption Sister Rosetta carried. Someone has already decided they know someone else's heart without ever listening to it. And maybe, just maybe, this story will give them the courage to listen first. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories about the moments between the headlines, the conversations that never made it into the official histories, the times when legends stopped being legends and became human beings trying to connect across the things that divide us. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because these stories aren't just about famous people. They're about the invisible moments that changed them. The private reconciliations, the quiet recognitions, the times when someone's courage to be honest met someone else's courage to listen. And those moments, those small private exchanges that nobody was supposed to witness, those are the ones that matter most. I'll see you in the next one.